Good morning everyone. Let us start our English class.
In today's class, let us discuss the exercise 1, 2, and 3 in the textbook. Choose the correct answer and fill in the blanks. First question: Dash and Dash were best friends. And the options are Mr. Frog, Mr. Bull, Mr. Rabbit, and Mr. Bee. And the next options are Mr. Elephant, Mr. Cow, Mr. Ox, and Mr. Sheep. So tell me, children, who were best friends? Yes, Mr. Frog and Mr. Ox were best friends. Second question: Mr. Frog wanted to become like Dash. And the options are Mr. Ox, Mr. Elephant, Mr. Rabbit, and Mr. Cow. What is the correct answer? Yes, Mr. Frog wanted to become like Mr. Ox. Third question: Dash gave Mr. Frog an idea. And the options are Mr. Ox, Mr. Rabbit, Mr. Bull, and Mr. Bee. What is the correct answer? Yes, Mr. Rabbit. Mr. Rabbit gave Mr. Frog an idea. Fourth question: Dash blotted up and turned blue. And the options are Mr. Frog, Mr. Fox, Mr. Rabbit, and Mr. Cow. Who blotted up and turned blue? Yes, Mr. Frog. Next question: Dash realized his foolishness at the end. And the options are Mr. Ox, Mr. Frog, Mr. Rabbit, and Mr. Bull. What is the correct answer? Yes, Mr. Frog. So, Mr. Frog realized his foolishness at the end. Next exercise: put a tick if the sentence is correct or an into mark if it is wrong. First question: Mr. Ox wanted to become like Mr. Rabbit. Is it true or false? Yes, it is false. So put an into mark. Second question: Mr. Ox was big and powerful. What about this statement? Yes, it is true. So put a tick mark. Third question: Mr. Frog could not catch a fly with his tongue. Is it true or false? Yes, it is false because Mr. Frog can catch a fly with his tongue. So put an into mark. Next question: Mr. Rabbit held his breath. Is it true or false? Yes, it is false because Mr. Frog held his breath, not Mr. Rabbit. So put an into mark. Next question: Mr. Frog was nimble and unique. Is it true or false? Yes, it is true. Mr. Frog was nimble and unique. So put a tick mark. Now let's discuss the questions and answers. First question: Why was Mr. Frog unhappy? I repeat, why was Mr. Frog unhappy? And the answer is Mr. Frog was unhappy because he wasn't big and powerful as Mr. Ox. I repeat, Mr. Frog was unhappy because he wasn't big and powerful as Mr. Ox. Second question: What was Mr. Rabbit's idea? I repeat, what was Mr. Rabbit's idea? And the answer is Mr. Rabbit's idea was to ask Mr. Frog to hold his breath. I repeat, Mr. Rabbit's idea was to ask Mr. Frog to hold his breath. Third question: What happened when Mr. Frog held his breath for long? I repeat, what happened when Mr. Frog held his breath for long? And the answer is Mr. Frog started turning blue when he held his breath for too long. I repeat, Mr. Frog started turning blue when he held his breath for too long. Next question: Who said sorry to Mr. Frog? I repeat, who said sorry to Mr. Frog? And the answer is Mr. Rabbit said sorry to Mr. Frog. I repeat, Mr. Rabbit said sorry to Mr. Frog. Fifth question. Why was Mr. Frog glad at the end? I repeat, why was Mr. Frog glad at the end? And the answer is Mr. Frog was glad to be alive and glad to be himself. I repeat, Mr. Frog was glad to be alive and glad to be himself. Don't forget to write these questions and answers in your notebook. Next is the follow-up activity. All of you take page number 46 in your textbook. The story of the ox and the frog is given below, but the sentences are not in correct order. Rewrite the sentences in correct order. So that's all for today's class. Thank you and have a nice day.